Hi FlossTube friends, and welcome back to part 3 of my History Stitch With Me podcast. There's a sentence for you. I hope you're all doing well. And recently, I've had a lovely break and I've been enjoying the sunshine here in Scotland. And guess what? I've also been to Holyrood Palace again. I went last week. I didn't expect to do that, but I decided to go down with my father-in-law because he's kind of big into history, and we went through all the staterooms again and all the bedchamber of Mary Queen of Scots, and it was so lovely to see it all again. Obviously it hasn't changed since the last time I was there, but it was nice to go back and just get that atmosphere again. So I really enjoyed that. And yeah, I always get to enjoy those visits, even though staff can be fickle about people taking photos or videos inside the palace. I did manage to get a little bit of footage outside the palace for about a few seconds, so I think I'll stick that in at the end of the video. So before I get started, I might ask that if you know someone who would be interested in listening to this podcast, by all means, please share the link. And also, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate a little thumbs up. I've heard, I don't know for sure, that it's supposed to make a difference to the YouTube algorithm. And when people give you enough likes, then YouTube are really kind to the videos. I don't know for sure, but it can't hurt, can it? So that would be really great. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, then please do so. So let's get started. Okay, so in part 3, I think we'll start where I left off in part 2 with Mary Queen of Scots giving birth at Edinburgh Castle in June 1566. And she had a companion and private secretary, and we discussed how he was murdered. Just 3 months earlier, he was murdered by her husband and some of her nobles. I can only imagine, right, the stress of being pregnant at a time when pregnancy was so dangerous. So imagine that, and having to contend with a husband as a murderer. It must have been awful. But it was well documented that Mary suffered from, I think it was bouts of fainting and something like gastric troubles. And also that these were probably exacerbated by stress. Well, I'd say that pregnancy in the 16th century would have been stressful enough, right? Since nearly every mother who gave birth would have to be prepared for the real possibility of death of either herself, the child, or both. It was a time when medicine was at its infancy. But nevertheless, despite the rotten time that this poor queen had just had, she gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby boy called James, and he was the heir to the succession, and he was an heir for both the crowns of Scotland and England. Queen Elizabeth over in England was said to say, quote, "The Queen of Scots is this day lighter of a fair son, and I am but barren stock." Apparently Elizabeth never wanted to marry, so she kind of, she got away with that, surprisingly. But yeah, it didn't do her country any good. I think people complained bitterly about the fact that Elizabeth decided to not marry, stay single, and just rule her kingdom. She was clever, actually. That was the right thing to do, because she outlived Mary and she was in control of everything. So anyway, still, Elizabeth sent her cousin well wishes, and apparently she even gave her a baptismal font made of pure gold. Just think of that. What a gift, right? So she really wasn't as mean as we might think. But things seemed to go from bad to worse for poor Mary. It was said that she no longer trusted her husband, Lord Darnley, but that she would keep him close, as they say. There's a saying, keep your friends close, but keep your enemies even closer. Some accounts will say that she manipulated and exerted a control of Darnley, still denying him the crown matrimonial that he pined for. And he did nothing much except sulked on his own. He stayed away from everybody, sulked inside his apartments, and didn't really want to have to do with anybody. Yeah, he was just a moody, capricious, not likable person. And he also apparently wrote letters to the French nobility and to the Pope complaining about his wife. Just imagine, as if she didn't have enough reasons to complain about him. So Mary was in no mood to let Darnley take control of her kingdom. She wanted to be in control, as you do. And she also kept her little boy protected by one of her earls. And some say, in fact, more than a few people say, that she plotted her revenge on Darnley, although absolute proof of her involvement in his death was just never found. They just could not find absolute proof. And in February the following year, 1567, Darnley was sick and he was recovering from smallpox, although some said that it was actually syphilis, which is a sexually transmitted disease, and he didn't get that from Mary. And he convalesced in a place called Kirkhoe Field, and I've tried to find where this actual place is today, and it's really difficult to sort of locate it in a modern city, because how do you find any like old building that was here like 500 years ago? How would you find the exact spot today, unless it was a castle, right? But it's sort of difficult to find. But I did manage to eventually find it, the exact spot, well, the area itself where Darnley was killed. And it's just really interesting to just really weird to kind of just stand there and think that the murder happened so long ago. But anyway, he was convalescing in this place called Kirkhoe Field, and it's not actually very far from Holyrood Palace, where Mary had already returned to after the birth of her son. So on the 10th of February at 2 o'clock in the morning, there was a huge explosion. It thundered across the whole city of Edinburgh, and the building that Darnley was residing in was absolutely reduced to rubble. I mean, it was, the intention was to actually, topple that building that he was sleeping in. And here is a sketch up on the screen now, which is a sketch that was actually done at the scene of the crime, and it's sort of done in different sections. So you've got Darnley first on the left, more or less middle, you've got the building itself, which is a load of rubble and all the stones thrown around everywhere. On the right side, you've got Darnley himself lying semi-naked in an orchard with his personal groom. There's a dagger on the ground and a chair and a rope. But the witnesses all say that he had been strangled whilst probably attempting to flee the building. Probably got scared, heard a noise, climbed out of a window on the chair and took a dagger with him. But then he was overcome by some people or persons, and they decided to strangle him and leave his body in the garden. Maybe he was strangled in the building, dragged to the garden, left there. Who knows? Nobody really knows. But what they do know is that the explosion did not kill him. So, also in this picture, interestingly, there is Darnley being carried away. The bottom left, see his body being carried away, and in the right of the picture, the other guy is getting buried on the spot. And this sketch was sent to Queen Elizabeth's private secretary called William Cecil, and he was the one who got to receive this actual sketch that you're looking at now. And so he could make sense of what happened. They wanted him to know and Elizabeth to know what exactly had happened. Okay. So, anyway, the reason that Mary had been implicated in this particular crime is because many believed that she was having an affair with the Earl of Bothwell. He was seen at Kirkhoe Field at some point before or after the explosion, and some said that he even provided the gunpowder. But Bothwell had good reasons for wanting Darnley dead, but then again so did Mary and many other nobles of the court. Darnley was not a nice person. And some say that the explosion was a cover-up for the murder, just to create confusion. So maybe the explosion was just to make people think that the murderer is whoever planted the gunpowder, but actually the murderer was somebody else who saw them escaping and thought, oh, look, there's that nasty guy. I think I'll just go over and throttle him. They never really could say who it was that killed him, but Bothwell, the Earl of Bothwell, was one of the main suspects, along with Mary herself, which kind of makes sense, right? Because I'm pretty sure they hated him by that point. But according to reports, Mary Queen of Scots was in a state of shock. She believed that the incident had been an explosion which had been intended to murder her, because she was asked by Darnley the previous evening to stay at his residence, to stay at Kirkerfield that night, but she refused, telling him that she had to go back to Holyrood and attend a wedding reception of one of her staff. So she kind of got out of that one by having, she had a sort of an excuse or reason to say to people, no, I that surely was intended for me. The only reason I wasn't there is because I had to attend a reception. If not, I would have been there. I would have been in that same building as my husband. But even so, Mary had to observe a 40-day solitary mourning period for Darnley. But again, some accounts verify that Mary was actually not quite as mournful as she should have been, because she was seen in attendance at another wedding just days after Darnley's death. And in some accounts I've read that she actually looked pretty bad. She actually looked shocked, scared, upset, everything. And other accounts say, no, she just got up and carried on as normal. So it's hard to know who's telling the truth, because if you read an account by her enemies, they will tell you, yeah, of course, she's the murderer. She didn't care that he was killed. She went out dancing afterwards. Then you hear accounts by her, maybe her ladies or people that loved her, and say, no, she was absolutely, devastated by this whole affair. But whatever the truth is, Mary was now a suspect in the murder of the King of Scotland. And Elizabeth wrote to her, still in full support, saying that she needed to find and punish those responsible immediately. And many people pressured her into putting Bothwell forward for trial. Surprisingly, she eventually did that, but Bothwell came out of it unscathed due to a lack of evidence. Soon, propaganda against both Mary and Bothwell began to appear in Edinburgh streets. There were placards which suggested that Mary was Bothwell's kind of loose woman, so to speak. And, very awful defamatory things that were said about her, and that she had killed her husband just to be with Bothwell. Of course, Mary denied any such involvement in Darnley's murder. But then you think to yourself, well, if somebody asked you if you'd murdered your husband, you're not going to say, yeah, it was me, just especially if you're a queen, right? She would have her reasons to try and do something and cover it up if that was the case. So rumours continued to swirl, and in around April 1567, Bothwell and some of his men intercepted Mary on the road to Linlithgow Palace. He told her that danger awaited her in Edinburgh and that she really should go with him. So Mary went with Bothwell, and this whole incident is one which historians are never quite certain if it was a forced incident or if she had gone freely with him. But we know that on arrival at Dunbar, she was actually taken hostage by Bothwell and raped. But there are accounts that say that she gave herself to him, that he was actually her lover. But the reason for this rape actually is so that she would marry him, because according to custom, it would have been dishonourable for Mary not to marry him after laying with him. So whether it was rape or not made absolutely no difference. The fact that she had had sex with Bothwell meant that the honourable thing to do would be to marry him. So this was just great for him, right? Because then he would become instant king. And she did marry Bothwell, and apparently, again, sources say that she had been forced into doing so. But there was other evidence that Mary was interested in Bothwell. She trusted him and looked upon him as her most fervent supporter. So nothing, of course, seemed to add up, and it just seems like we'll never truly know just how much of a part she played in Darnley's murder. But really, we have to say that his murder was really her downfall in the end. Because what happened next was a terrible chapter in her life, even more so than the events she had already endured. So eventually there was a standoff at a place called Carberry Hill, and this was between Mary's court nobles and herself and Bothwell on the other side. And I haven't actually been to Carberry Hill. It is a place which is just outside Edinburgh itself, and I do happen to go past it when I go to a big shopping centre. And I think, oh, it was just over there on the left that Mary had the standoff with her nobles. It sort of enters my head every time I go past in the bus or whatever it is. But there is like a sort of monument or something there which sort of commemorates the event, and it says, on this day in whatever time it was, Mary came here with Bothwell and she surrendered to her nobles. So it's all written there, or sort of engraved into this stone. I don't know whether the stone was actually engraved during her time, or whether it was engraved probably in the 18th century. But it's another place on my list that I could just go and see, right? I think I'll maybe do that one day. But anyway, so she was at this hill, famous hill, with her nobles on one side and herself and Bothwell on the other. And apparently this standoff just continued on a really hot day, and it went on and on and on, and neither of them surrendered. Mary's troops apparently grew tired and restless, and they were thirsty, and there was nothing to drink, so they all started disappearing. But the nobles stood their ground, and there they were on the other side. I don't really know what they expected, each side to do. But in the end, what happened was that Mary just said, look, I surrender. She surrendered to her nobles. She didn't have a choice. And but by that point they had charged her for treason in the murder of her husband. They wanted her gone. They wanted her to be imprisoned. And so she surrendered in return for them letting Bothwell go free. So she said, if I surrender, you will let my husband go and not take him as a prisoner. Well, she must have really loved the guy to do that, because, what I don't get is, if he'd just raped you and forced you to marry him, why would you surrender, and let him go free? That part doesn't actually make sense to me. But that is actually what happened. Maybe she thought that by letting Bothwell go, he would escape and he would maybe raise an army and come back and, rescue her anyway. He'd rescued her before. He was always her best supporter. He would go and, he was always there when she was in trouble and she needed him. This gave her a false sense of security, I expect. So he ran for the hills, of course, and escaped. And Mary was then taken as a prisoner by her own nobles, ferried off to a castle called Lochleven. And that is a place I've been to. It's a beautiful little fortress which is surrounded by a lake. And I went there a couple of years ago, and it's such a peaceful, beautiful place. And you can actually take a small boat ride across the water to the castle itself. So you can only really get to the castle by water, because it is just surrounded in this little lake. And that's where she was taken by her nobles. So Bothwell was heard of no more, and Mary spent approximately a year at Lochleven, I believed. She probably had to recover by that point. I know I probably would. I mean, just imagine, it was just like one drama after the other for this poor woman. And it didn't end there. The drama just didn't end there. It was reported that during this time that she was in Lochleven Castle, she gave birth to twins. And obviously they belonged to Bothwell, because they've kind of worked out the time frame. But she had miscarried them. She miscarried these twin children, and they were hastily buried in the castle grounds, because, it's yet another scandal, and it was one that she didn't need, obviously. So they must have decided, we just have to get rid of this evidence really quickly. But no remains have ever been discovered. Her nobles also visited her, and when they did so, they forced her to abdicate in favour of her son James, and then he was made the King of Scotland. So poor Mary didn't get a choice. What she did get a choice in was marrying these awful men, and I think that's probably where she went very wrong, because she just picked these awful men as her husbands. They couldn't do anything for her. So this was the start of Mary's captivity, which was to last a long 19 years. And Eventually, she managed to escape from Lochleven. I think she dressed up as a maid woman, as you know, one of her staff, and she managed to escape, and she made a run for it. And she went to England, to Elizabeth, hoping that her cousin would support her, as she'd always done through the years, hoping that Elizabeth would raise an army and help her to regain her throne in Scotland. But it never happened, because Elizabeth, by now, had just grown weary of this Scottish Queen's dramas, and she was now even more concerned because Mary was on her own soil. Now, you know, Mary in Scotland, in her own kingdom, is one thing, but Mary in England is another thing. And of course, Elizabeth was being hassled all the time by Cecil, her private secretary, that, you know, Mary wasn't good, Mary was trouble, Mary just wanted Elizabeth gone, Mary just wanted the English throne, you know, we can't help her, we can't do anything, and we should imprison her. And of course, this was the advice that Elizabeth received. Now, she obviously didn't want to hurt Mary ever, but she also didn't want to lose her own head. So the only thing that Elizabeth could do was keep Mary imprisoned in England. If she sent her back to Scotland, she would have been at the mercy of her nobles again. If she sent her to France, then, you know, she could drum up support in France and invade England. So it was really difficult for Elizabeth. So she just decided, well, we'll put you into one of my castles here in England so we can keep an eye on you. And she could not be set free. She could not be set free because she could raise Catholic supporters. And of course, Elizabeth didn't want to lose her throne. So Elizabeth had to agree with Cecil, and she incarcerated Mary, who spent the next 19 years shuffled around from one castle to another castle, not exactly living in poverty now, but she had her queenly comforts. But she was not to leave the country, and she was not to plot the demise of Queen Elizabeth. But the question is, did Mary involve herself in plots or not? That's the question. She has always denied this, but at the age of 44, Cecil, who's a very shrewd and clever man, framed her or uncovered a plot that she was embroiled in, and this plot was actually called the Babington plot, and this was a plot that was designed to assassinate Elizabeth and put Mary on the throne of England. So there was a lot of espionage, and Cecil was finally given certain proof that Mary had agreed to a plot that would be rid of Elizabeth. And Elizabeth, when she found this out, she still didn't act. She still didn't want to believe that her cousin would do such a thing. She wanted to ignore it, to think that it might go away. She just couldn't handle any more of this. She was tired of hearing it. And Cecil had to literally shake her and say, this is real. She wants you dead. So eventually, after, you know, Cecil went on and on at her, she gave in and she signed a death warrant. After standing trial for treason, Mary was found guilty, but even after the trial, it took Elizabeth a few months to actually sign a death warrant. She just didn't want to do that to her cousin. She didn't believe that it was right to murder an anointed queen. She didn't feel that it was the right thing to do, and it you know, you can imagine what she must have gone through in her heart and her mind trying to make that decision to kill her cousin queen. But sadly, the end of the road came for poor Mary, and she was sentenced to death in early 1587, February 1587, at the age of 44. She looked old, she looked sick, she had white hair, she wore a wig. By that point, though, she said, I'm ready to die, for it will make an end of my troubles. She'd really had enough herself. She'd been trying to fight, trying to fight her way through the system, through the politics, through the religious turmoil. She just wasn't able to get back on her feet. Basically, she just had too many rotten men around her, right? That's what happened. But at her execution, she had the last say. She wore a gown of bright red, which is a gown that signifies Catholic martyrdom. And apparently she went to the block with dignity and a calm manner. And she died that day in Fotheringay Castle. And from what I've read, Elizabeth was haunted over her death for the rest of her life. Elizabeth was haunted at killing her cousin Queen. And it was said, I don't know if this is true, that on Elizabeth's deathbed, the last words on her lips before she took her last breath was Mary Queen of Scots. I wonder if she actually saw her when she was, when she just passed away, if she actually saw Mary Queen of Scots. Maybe Mary Queen of Scots came and forgave her. That would have been a nice ending for the two of them, wouldn't it? They're actually buried very close together now in Westminster Abbey, so close in death. They never actually met each other in life. Maybe they met each other in death. So what do you think about Mary Queen of Scots' story? Because for years, many people have discussed her involvement in these murders and plots. And to date, no one can find any real evidence of proof. And she obviously denied everything. So was she a poor, unfortunate queen who made terrible choices in life, but ultimately paid the highest price in a male-orientated world? Or was she the opposite? Was she a cunning, ruthless, ambitious ruler? Did she kill Darnley? Marry Bothwell? Did she do all these terrible things? I can't see this lady, who was a devout Catholic, as being a cunning, ruthless and mean person. I just feel like what I feel is that she just made the wrong choices. She just was too much of an emotional queen. She probably was overwhelmed with all these fractious nobles constantly fighting and bickering and trying to get rid of her. And her half-brother, James Stuart, also tried to, engage in plots to kill his half-sister Mary. So she couldn't rely on anyone who she considered family. Her husband was awful. Her half-brother was awful. She didn't really have anybody, apart from Bothwell probably, that she felt she could trust. So making decisions would have been a difficult thing when you feel like you can't trust anybody, right? So I feel like she ruled with her heart. She wasn't able to just put an end to all the troubles. I don't think she had that kind of power in her, the kind of power that Elizabeth showed. I think Mary wanted to be more of a traditional queen. She wanted to marry, have a child, have the man in her marriage be strong, just as strong as her, be able to make decisions for her even. But she just, I think she just wasn't the type of queen that was able to cope with such an unruly court. And yet Elizabeth showed the opposite kind of strength. She refused to marry. She refused to hand that power over to another man. She refused to rule herself. She refused somebody else to rule for her. She wanted to do it herself so she could be in control of everything. I think she made the right decision for the time period, because obviously women didn't have much going for them in those days. So yeah, I think that is what I think. So that is it for the Mary Queen of Scots podcast. And yeah, I want to say thanks so much for journeying along with me on them. It's been a lot of fun. And if you enjoyed this podcast, just let me know, and maybe I can find some other historical events that I can talk about. Because, there isn't just the Mary Queen of Scots story. There's so many things in history that are so fascinating. And I like to put my own spin on it. I like to talk about it and discuss things that happened in the past. And it actually motivates me to do it. So if you say to me in the comments, oh, I really enjoyed it, I'd love you to do another one. Or maybe even tell me about someone in history that you really love to hear about. And I can come on and do just a similar thing as I did with this one. That would be fantastic. So let me know. So if you do ever come to Scotland, don't forget to visit some of these key places. I think they're fascinating. I go time and time again. You might want to go down to Edinburgh Castle, where Mary gave birth to her son. You might like to see Holyrood Palace, where her secretary David Rizzio was stabbed to death. You might like to go and and see some of the other places. Linlithgow Palace, where she was born. You might like to see Stirling Castle, where she spent part of her childhood. And there's just so many places that you can go and see. It's absolutely breathtaking. So I thoroughly recommend a Mary Queen of Scots trail here in Scotland. So thanks again, and I hope you have a wonderful stitching week, and I'll see you again soon. Hi, I'm on a little visit today down to the Holyrood Palace, and I'm just about to go inside. I don't know if they will allow photographs today. And up there you can see was where Mary's bedchamber was, in that round turret. Look how spectacular this palace really is. It's quite breathtaking. So I'm going to pop inside and do a little Mary Queen of Scots hunting. See you in a bit.